Holy crap. That has gone really well. Thank you so much for all the support on Patreon. It's incredible to see. I don't know how to put into words how thankful I am, but I am incredibly thankful. I'm also just thankful for all of you who had words of kindness and support in the comments below of the last video. And I mean, obviously not everyone can give money, not everyone wants to give money, and that's totally fine, but just that supportiveness, just that kindness, just that, all that stuff, it means a lot. It's incredibly motivating, and yeah, I don't know what words to say except just thank you, and that I hope this final video in this series lives up to your expectations. Okay, hold up. I recorded that a few days ago, but the copyright situation just changed today. If you supported me on Patreon or are considering doing so, I recommend that you listen to this, but if not, you can just skip past this to the timecode on screen to watch the video. So Warner Bros. First doubled down on parts 2 and 6 of my Teen Titans series before I put up part 7. This basically means that I disputed their copyright claim and they came back to me and said, no, we stand by our decision. This led me to believe that they would do that for all the videos. However, just a couple days ago, they released their copyright claims on every video. I'm really surprised that they would decide to do that, but hey, I'm not complaining. I honestly thought there was no chance that they would do that. This includes parts 2 and 6, which I redisputed. Anyway, I want to let you all know, since I want you to have all the information if you were considering backing me or if you already have. While more issues may pop up in the future, this has ended up being not nearly as bad as it seemed, at least for the time being. Regardless of if you decide to still support me financially this way or not, thank you so much. The fact that so many of you cared enough to back me on here, it's amazing. Now, once again, I hope you enjoy the last part of this Teen Titans analysis. In this season of Teen Titans, things change. In terms of structure, this season is wildly different from previous seasons in ways that make analyzing and discussing it an overall different process. This season is far less focused on individual episodes that explore thematic concepts intermingled with a character-based arc, and instead has nearly every episode of the season tie in with the central conflict in some manner. In concept, this is a great idea, and something I've wanted since I started watching this show. Sure, some of the episodic episodes have been great. Haunted and Nevermore immediately pop into my head, but there are a number I could mention here. But regardless, it's neat to have it linked together with an overarching plot that generally isn't horribly intrusive and doesn't disturb the episode's individual plots. However, this is more complex than it at first seems. This isn't a completely positive change. Some very big problems reveal themselves with this new structure, and some strange decisions are made that, in some ways, result in a season that manages to be more cohesive than any previous season, while also feeling more rushed than any season that precedes it. So, naturally, let's start at the beginning and go from there. It is immediately obvious that this is meant to be a Beast Boy-centric season, and we quickly get some important character development for him. This group that he used to be a part of, the Doom Patrol, clearly cares about him, but their leader Mento is harsh, and even when Beast Boy is excited about some improvement with his powers, Mento chastises him for not following orders. Suddenly, Beast Boy's want for attention and his want to make others laugh is put into a new context. It's actually quite sad. While his old group doesn't seem to have been particularly cruel to him or anything like that, they were certainly unkind in some respects, and their leader placed their goal of defeating the Brotherhood of Evil above everything else. Importantly, this includes their friendship and bond with one another. Both at the beginning and end of the episode, we are reminded of this when Beast Boy chooses to save his friends when he could instead try to stop the Brotherhood of Evil. This also adds a lot to Beast Boy's relationship with Terra. While it always made sense on a basic level that Beast Boy would like to have someone laugh at all his dumb jokes. I mean, who doesn't want people to laugh when they tell a joke? The fact that she cared so much for him, the fact that he meant so much to her, well, it would mean even more to someone who has struggled with being accepted. It would mean even more for someone who has failed and who hasn't been treated like an equal by his past group. This, of course, adds more to his relationship with the other Titans as well. It's also clear that he hasn't moved past this yet. His dialogue with the Doom Patrol makes it clear that he still wants to impress them, that he wants them to take him seriously and treat him as an equal. However, the Doom Patrol doesn't take the Teen Titans as a whole very seriously, and believe that they will get in the way or that they simply shouldn't get involved with this conflict between them and the Brotherhood of Evil. In this second episode of this conflict, this is made even more apparent, as Mento doesn't want the Teen Titans coming along with them. Even more telling, perhaps, is that he won't listen to any of Beast Boy's suggestions, and leads his team foolishly without a plan into a confrontation with the Brotherhood of Evil, no matter how much Beast Boy tries to tell him that they're too tired and weak to do this on their own. It's interesting to see this side of Beast Boy, a side that is relatively pragmatic when compared with the other characters surrounding him. Up until now, he's mostly been a comic relief character, or when he's not occupying that role, someone who deals with situations as they come to him. In other words, he isn't exactly concerned with planning or with what could go wrong. Here though, well, he has to be. This gives off the impression that he is rather adaptable and a selfless character. What I mean is that he changes to suit the role he's needed for. With the Teen Titans, he needs to be that silly side that keeps them from getting too serious. With the Doom Patrol, he needs to be more serious and realistic, and even ends up coming up with a plan to help him and Mento get into the Brotherhood of Evil's base. One thing here is that I'm a little fuzzy on the details of Beast Boy's plan. Sure, it's clear that they're being a bit more cautious and intelligent here, and that Mento is actually listening to Beast Boy's suggestions, which is leading them to greater success. But it would have been nice to get down to the details of this. If Beast Boy's going to come up with a plan, I think it would be good to see that plan in full, to see every angle of it. As it stands, it seems that his plan wasn't all that great anyway, as the Teen Titans have to get in there and help him, along with the other members of the Doom Patrol. Personally, I think it would have been best if Beast Boy and Mento had gone back and forth, each giving ideas of what they could do, with Beast Boy ultimately deciding on the final course of action. Still, I like the ideas that these episodes have tackled, and what they bring to the table when considering Beast Boy's character. Overall, these are two pretty strong episodes that set up the whole season's conflict. After all, now the Brotherhood of Evil has their eyes set on the Titans, and that's going to be clear throughout the entirety of this season. I also like that we start off with this two-parter that explores the dynamic between Beast Boy and the Doom Patrol. It's the first time the series has ever started a season like this, and it's nice that we get to carry all this Beast Boy development with us throughout the rest of the season. Now, episode 3 is where things get a bit odd, as we spend most of our time here focusing on Hotspot, who's being chased by Madame Rouge. Madame Rouge. Sorry, I went all Canadian on you for a second. Regardless of my Canadianness though, the Brotherhood of Evil wants his communicator, as this will allow them to find all the Titans. First off, I like how this episode handles its tension, with Madame Rouge needing to try and trick Hotspot. It helps to break up the more action-oriented scenes, and honestly, I found the dialogue a bit more exciting than the action. It got really hard to tell at some points if Hotspot was going to hand over his communicator. The weird part, however, is that up until now we've hardly seen Hotspot. While I don't dislike him, I also don't really know much about him, and I think it would have been wise to either spend more time focusing on him earlier, to give us a reason to care about him in this episode, or to have Madame Rouge go after a different hero. At times, I just found it a bit hard to care about Hotspot, since we know only the most basic thing about him, that he's a hero. That's basically it. He doesn't have any horribly defining characteristic other than that, and we don't know anything about his own goals or philosophies. It's a bit of a shame because I actually like the idea of the story cutting away from the central characters to explore some other perspectives in a new locale. It makes this conflict a lot more epic in scope. But I think that Hotspot's character could have been handled much better here, in order to give us more of a reason to care specifically about him. One other complaint I have is very subjective. Well, I mean, most of this stuff is subjective, but this in particular stands out to me. I just don't like that Robin fell for this. After all, he knows that Madame Rouge can shapeshift at this point, and he still gives his communicator over to her when she's disguised as Hotspot. From how I understand his character, it seems unlikely that he would do this, and like he would probably ask to see Madame Rouge first. Of course, everyone makes mistakes though, so some might argue that this lapse in judgment is totally reasonable, and I can't really argue with that. It just frustrated me, personally, that Robin fell for this. Overall, I like the concept behind this episode, but I don't think it was handled all that well. If we're going to take time away from the central characters, it better be to focus on someone who we can really care about, or who we really want to see more of. For me, Hotspot didn't end up being that. Episode 4 also doesn't focus on the main group of Titans, and instead opts to explore the Titans East. For now, I'm going to only talk about how I feel about this episode on its own, and not within the context of the whole season. I'm going to save that part where I talk about this season as a whole for closer to the end. On its own, this is a solid episode. Right away, the music captured me. With this scene where Control Freak roams around Titan's tower, the guitar sometimes matching up with his steps, and the way that it matches his intensity and disappointment as he tries to challenge the Titans and realizes that they aren't there right now. Of course, they aren't there because they're fighting the Brotherhood of Evil, which is why the Titans East come to watch the city. Overall, this episode is focused on developing the Titans East through showing how people don't really know about them, at least not as much as the main group we've grown accustomed to. The elements of this episode all tie together with this central idea really well. At first, no one recognizes the Titans East. Control Freak creates challenges for them because, well, he's an obsessive individual. Other people become more enamored with and interested in these people, and they succeed in defeating Control Freak. Simple stuff, but all narratively effective. While there isn't a central theme here, there doesn't need to be. This episode is far more concerned with building up characters than with communicating a lesson to its audience, and I have absolutely no problem with that. Considering the scope of this season's conflict, it's important to do this sort of thing, to take a step back and focus on different conflicts in different places with different characters. It's simple, so I don't really have all that much to say about it, but I enjoyed it quite a lot. Episode 5 focuses on Starfire and Red Star. All you really need to know about this is that Red Star is an individual who's hidden himself away due to an uncontrollable power. Here we actually see a side of Starfire that I don't recall seeing before. Her anger with someone who is afraid, or in other words, how upset she can get with people for being cowardly. She gets very aggressive with Red Star, yelling at him and getting him a bit riled up. At first I thought that this seemed contrary to her character, but when I thought about it more it seemed in line with her personality. After all, we haven't seen her face a character like this before, a character who's given up on trying to fight and who has resigned themselves to hiding. Based on what we know about her, she's a character who generally wants to fix problems and who wants people to work together. Sure, we've seen some moments where she's personally upset and not immediately open to this, but you know what I mean. She tends to bring others together and she pretty much never gives up. So it adds depth to see her get upset like this, when she encounters someone who outright refuses to try anymore and who trusts themselves so little that they are willing to give up. Part of this is that Red Star has been mistaken this whole time. He may have believed that he could stop his power from harming others just by hiding from it, but sure enough it has been leaking out into the world without him even knowing. Metaphorically, I think this shows how bottling up what we perceive as something negative about ourselves, that ignoring some part of ourselves that is hard to control, and that hiding from conflict doesn't generally work well. If we don't deal with it, these negatives can seep out and still affect our lives in ways we might not immediately see, but that will, all the same, be destructive. In addition to this, we see that some of the blame is on the people who didn't try to help Red Star sort through this and who made him into an outcast. So it's also important to try to, on some level, help those who are going through hard times, at least from a broad perspective when we consider a whole society rather than an individual. What I mean is that no individual in this group is blamed for rejecting Red Star. Instead, the whole group is chastised. This immediately made me think specifically about mental illness and of how we need systems properly put in place to help people who are depressed, bipolar, or whatever it may be. One thing is that I feel this conflict could have used a bit more time to develop. As it stands, it's just a bit too rushed for my taste. In particular, I wish that we'd seen more of Red Star before he hid himself away, that we'd gotten a better understanding of his relationship with these other people. Sure, his arc is effective in that I can dig into these ideas on display without much difficulty and discuss them with you, but I'd be lying if I pretended that I found this very gripping. I simply didn't care all that much for Red Star. Since he's the main character who receives development in this episode, I think it would have been better to spend more time on him. Although with the runtime and episode number that the creators were provided, it's obvious that there wasn't much choice in this matter, and I think they did a pretty solid job with what they were given. Now, maybe I missed something here, but at the end I thought the implication was that Red Star died. But then closer to the end he's just okay? That struck me as a bit odd, but I'll come back to that more later. Next up is this episode where the Titans run into Cole and Gnarrk while trying to find Dr. Light. This is another episode where the Teen Titans don't change much. What I mean is that their characters and relationships aren't explored. Rather, the effect they have on another character is explored. Here, that character is Gnarrk, who must overcome his fear of modern technology and people from outside in order to save Cole when she gets kidnapped by Dr. Light. To be honest, I wasn't particularly pleased when I realized that we were going to be focusing on a side character again like this. Honestly, I just didn't care. Sure, it works in that it sets up some new players for the grand finale, but do we really need new players? We already have so many heroes that have been introduced to us but not explored much at all. I would rather have a smaller scale conflict that's fully explored where maybe there are 10 or so Titans in total, including the regulars, than continually introduce new people who just don't get to be explored much. Obviously, whether or not we care about a character is going to be incredibly subjective, so this isn't to say that jumping from person to person is necessarily a bad idea. I just think that the new people who are introduced could have used 2 episodes worth of time to get us to really care about what's going on with them, or that some things needed to be reworked to have us care faster. I think part of it is that this is a bit of a retread of what we just saw. If we boil this down to its most basic elements, the Titans meet a character who is afraid to leave a certain place, but then they are forced to because of a dangerous force and the Titans help them out, both emotionally and physically. Now, we can often boil down stories like this and they'll sound similar. If the stuff that can't be boiled down is different enough, that's totally fine. But there isn't much on top of this to really dig into. It's very bare bones. If any of you really enjoy this one and have a more interesting take on it, I'd love to hear it though. For me, episode 7 is more enjoyable but comes with its own problems. Here, Raven has to take care of 3 children, all of which have powers, and try to get them somewhere safely because the Brotherhood of Evil is after them. As one might expect, Raven isn't good with kids, so this causes some problems. I like the central idea here enough. Seeing these different people interact, these overall loud and dependent children and this individual who wants peace and quiet as much as possible, is bound to bring some interesting situations. And it does. I in particular like when Raven calls Beast Boy and asks for help, and he tells her a joke and she just spits it out really fast at the kids, and when she tells the kids a bedtime story about when Trigon tried to end all mortals. These are funny, endearing moments, and there are more of them, like how Melvin tries to tell her things that she could do to take care of the kids. One more serious aspect of this dynamic is that Raven has to learn to trust these kids and to listen to them. This is mainly shown through Melvin telling Raven about her invisible friend Bobby, who Raven believes is imaginary. Of course, he's not, and that's part of what saves them in the end. That part of this is fine enough. In fact, considering how terrible Raven's childhood likely was, it makes sense that she might want to learn how to deal with these young folks. But I think this could have been handled better. While Melvin does plenty of nice stuff for Raven and tries to help her out, the other two consistently bother her with no real sign that they're going to stop. Sure, Teether gives her his soother, I guess, but other than that, not much nice from them, which I don't blame them for, they're just kids after all. But I find it strange that Raven ends up suddenly caring about them a lot when she drops them off. I mean, she cares about them so much that she calls them my kids when she goes to rescue them. To me, it really didn't feel like the episode built up to that. I think there should have been more moments where she saw something useful in the children, or where they did something that made her kind of happy. Maybe more of a focus on Raven's past and childhood here could have helped this out, though it would have been hard to squeeze that in with this runtime. So this is another case where the general idea here is fine, but where things are too rushed for my taste. I think more time could have been spent on what's unique about these kids, when we only really get that for Melvin. Teether is just a baby, so he doesn't do much, which I guess, fair enough. But Timmy Tantrum over here? It would have been nice if he had some characteristics that got explored other than the fact that he spends most of his time shrieking. This might be a lot of bias on my part though, since I don't tend to enjoy being around kids. So maybe if you're more inclined to like kids, you'd be able to appreciate this one better than I do. It's by no means bad, I just don't enjoy it very much personally. Now, episode 8 is a neat one. I finally get to see why people were so adamant about Jinx being an interesting character, and you know what? After this, yeah, she is. I certainly wasn't expecting quite this sort of development for her, but it's nice that we see such a simple character get thrust into a new situation where they're at the center of the episode. She's fairly smart, snarky, and in a way that isn't all that different from the Titans East, wants to be taken seriously. In this case though, she of course wants to be taken seriously by Madame Rouge and the Brotherhood of Evil. Though she comes to realize that these people won't be impressed by her, that they won't give her the acceptance she wants, and ends up turning against them. Alongside this, we see Kid Flash trying to convince her that she can be something more. I really like that dynamic, with how he'll say things that are true and she knows it and she'll start agreeing with him and get annoyed by it. It's a lot of fun to watch them just talk. And there's more to it than it being fun. As she says, I'm bad luck, good was never an option for me. So she just needed someone to give her the chance, to give her the benefit of the doubt, to believe in her. In some ways, this isn't all that different from what Raven needed. This is another one of those episodes that's handled well enough that there's little to critique and also little to say. The premise of this episode is simple but unexpected, and its execution is effective. It also adds a lot to the epic nature of this conflict. This isn't just about the regular Titans anymore. It's about all these people they've met and will meet. But this is what I meant when I said it would be better to focus on previously established people as opposed to bringing new people into the mix. Jinx is a good example of this, in that they've done a great job here of changing who she is. But I would also like to see more of that, to see more of her changing and more of what she does. Maybe there could be an episode where she begrudgingly teams up with the Teen Titans about something because they and Kid Flash need her help, and by the end she realizes that they have more in common than she initially expected, and they come to a mutual understanding of one another. As it stands, we see the beginning of her journey to becoming a good person, and we miss out on all this other stuff that could have been very interesting. Still though, this is an outstanding episode in and of itself. Episode 9 is another comedic episode, and one that I liked quite a lot. Here, the ding-dong daddy has stolen some secret item from Robin, and he challenges the Titans to a race to get it back. Along the way, many villains join in on the race and try to get it as well. While this episode is essentially one long chase scene, it manages to keep things fairly fresh by jumping between multiple characters, all of which find themselves in different situations. Robin encounters Red X, Cyborg and Beast Boy are being chased by a group of minions that are trying to deconstruct their car, and Raven and Starfire end up disguising themselves as villains in order to get on a bus full of them. Now, I personally felt that the Cyborg and Beast Boy section went on a little bit too long, but this is by no means a major complaint, and the episode moves along at a fast pace overall. Meanwhile, the idea of what's actually in the case kept me interested until the end of the episode. After all, what is it that Robin could be hiding? He may be a pretty secretive person, but he seems particularly concerned about this. So while this moment when all these other villains arrive is comedic, it's also a genuine escalation of a genuine conflict for Robin. Whatever this is, it's clearly important to him. When Robin finally does get the case, I love this moment where his friends tell him that he doesn't need to show them because it's fine to have secrets. Whenever stuff like this happens, it reminds me of how far they've come since the first season, since the first episode, and of how subtle and gradual some of the changes in their dynamics have been. However, the writers decide to troll us here, which I imagine ticked a lot of people off. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. On one hand, the idea that we don't get to see the item is a bit funny to me, but overall I think it's more annoying than it is humorous. I like to have questions answered, but having an open ending like this still makes some sense. After all, this is a secret that he's going to share with his friends, not with the audience. Still, I think it would have been better to show us this, so we could gain a better understanding of Robin's character. On top of that, well, this is the last time we're going to see Red X, which means that we never get to know who he is either. Obviously, people are going to have mixed feelings about this too. The idea of having him always be a mystery isn't necessarily bad, and I can see why they didn't have time to delve into that in this season. But it is one loose end of the story that never gets tied up. Personally, I hope that they'll put more focus on Red X in Season 6, assuming that actually happens. I feel as though that villain could suit a Starfire-centric conflict quite well. But for now, yeah, Red X just doesn't get the time I feel he deserves. Also, Ding Dong Daddy is really creepy, even just the name. Someone needs to call the police. Now on to episode 10, which is one of my favorite episodes in this season. Also, it should have been the first episode in this series, since it's where we see the Titans meet. When I said that I wanted some context for the relationship, this is what I really meant. I wanted just a little bit of who they were before meeting. And this episode makes it clear just how much of a group of misfits they are, and how they've each, for some reason or another, been somewhat isolated from other people. Robin seems to have done this by choice, but the others, not so much. So seeing how they come together, how they each support each other so quickly and find commonality in their differences, it's quite touching. Beast Boy longs to be accepted, so he's quick to accept Cyborg. Cyborg feels like a freak, so he understands what it's like to feel isolated, like Raven is. And Raven is just looking for an opportunity to be the best person she can be, and she finds that in these people. Meanwhile, Robin finds his skill as a leader here, after believing that he needed to move on and work alone. Through forming this group, they all find acceptance in one another and build a friendship that ultimately will allow them to save the world. One smart move here is that they're all going after Starfire, who is destroying the city. Of course, based on what we know about Starfire so far, this is not something we would have ever seen her doing. So one strength of having this episode later on is that it makes us consider who Starfire becomes later, and how her friends have such an impact on her personality. A little bit of kindness goes a long way for Starfire. Obviously, we would have still been able to see this if this came first, but thinking back gives a certain sense of surprise in the opposite direction. We're surprised at who Starfire once was, assuming we haven't read the comics. There are several things going on here. First, the power of language is explored, in that Starfire is at first unable to conceptualize nice because she's never heard of such a thing before. Without language, she is unable to properly explore this concept or to act based upon it. Second, once again, we're seeing how Starfire is at the center of this group, and maybe it's a good time to explore Starfire's character specifically. Raven and Starfire are my two favorite characters in the series, and yet they are probably the most different. While Raven, in my opinion, changes more than any of the other main five in the series, Starfire changes the least. However, it isn't necessary for a character to change in order for them to be interesting. And while I've already discussed why I like Raven, Starfire has been somewhat pushed to the side because of her lack of an individual arc within the show, and because it's very different to discuss a relatively constant character. When I said earlier in the series that Starfire is a simple character, what I meant is that she is a very consistent and, by extension, an emotionally powerful individual. While other characters have some level of change that is focused on, Starfire isn't so much about a large change. Instead, her strength comes from the effect she has on others around her. Now, while complexity is generally perceived as one of the things that makes a character good, it's not actually necessary. There's nothing worse about a relatively simple character who has an effect on the world. In fact, a lot of heroes and stories are like this, and we often see story structure where a major character will affect side characters by upholding certain ideals consistently, or by just being a consistent person. There's an equal amount of enjoyment that can be found in these characters. In fact, sometimes I like them more. In some sense, they ground the story and provide a comfortable sense of familiarity, where other things may change but they will remain unchanged. This often ends up feeling like a testament to the human spirit, or in this case, the alien spirit, but you know what I mean. These characters can be very motivating. However, to say that Starfire has no complexity would be blatantly false. She does. She is developed in a few ways throughout the series. Mainly, these changes boil down to her growing closer with her friends, and down to her trusting them and becoming surer of herself and of their relationship. In particular, we've seen a number of times where she becomes upset with her friends and stops talking to them, but these times are few and far between, and I don't believe that we see a single instance of this in the final season. She's grown past this and become even more entrenched in her ideal, and her ideal that they should always work to get along, that they should never stop fighting for one another, and that they need to stick together. Even here, even before she has begun to embody these ideals, she still stands for that in the show. After all, in an accidental way, she is already that thing which all the other members of the group can form around, that person who keeps them together. It's nice how thematically consistent her place in the show is. It's endearing and one of the reasons why I love her character so much. Now let's talk about the end of this season's major arc, where the Titans come together to fight the Brotherhood of Evil. This is where things get particularly messy this season, where it becomes exceedingly clear that something went wrong and that the story is meant to be something that it isn't. First off, approximately the first half of this episode is spent on busy work, with the Titans going to round up some new heroes. The problem here is that we already have enough new and old players involved in this conflict. We don't need more. Sure, if there was more time then that could work, but with 13 episodes? There just isn't enough time, and the fact that many of these heroes who join up with Beast Boy in the next episode are ones that are only introduced here only makes it worse. These characters get pretty much no time to develop, even though, based on their powers and designs, they seem like they could be interesting. That's what all the major problems I have here boil down to. There isn't enough time. While this moment where the Titans fail as the Brotherhood of Evil launches their assault is really well done in terms of direction, music, visuals, and tone, it doesn't work for me on an emotional level. What I mean is that this moment relies on its build-up, as pretty much all big moments in stories do, and I don't care enough about many of these characters. Instead of going, oh no, what's happened to all these characters I care about? I couldn't help but look at many of them and go, I don't really care about them. Or wait, who is that? Or I wish that character had a bit more time to develop before this. This perplexed me. How could this moment on its own be so competently made but be so out of place in this plot? How did they nail the moment itself but screw up the build-up? My immediate theory was that this was originally supposed to be a longer plot that got trimmed down due to an unexpected episode limit. And what I found in an interview with Glenn Murakami, one of the major people who worked on the series, is that I was correct. In this interview, he says that this season was supposed to have 20 episodes, not 13, but that it ended up getting cut down to 13. Obviously, I'm assuming that this interview I found is accurate, but I don't see why it would be fabricated, and this idea that this was supposed to be a longer series certainly explains some things about the end product. After all, then we would have had time to get a proper introduction to more of these heroes. I mean, I'm assuming that's what those extra 7 episodes would have been spent on. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say about episode 11 beyond that though. Despite its good idea and strong execution at some points, it's an overall rushed endeavor, where new players who feel unnecessary are brought into the story way too late into the arc. Episode 12 is where a lot of Beast Boy's development is meant to lead. This is where he adapts to a seemingly hopeless situation and devises a plan based on a limited group of people who are, at least as far as we can tell close to the start of this episode, the only ones who have escaped the Brotherhood. Once again, the Brain has a fantastic segment where he narrates about the Titan's demise, with outstanding music and visuals complementing it. And once again, I'm ticked off that we will never see this arc as it was originally envisioned. My first problem with this episode is that we didn't previously see this secret base, as far as I can remember. If some of the Titans are going to come and hide out here at this crucial point in the story, this should have been brought up earlier in some capacity, and we should have seen that this was some sort of backup plan that they had. My second problem is that while this is meant to be Beast Boy's moment, it just doesn't turn out that way in my opinion. Sure, he comes up with this plan to get into the Brotherhood's base, but the part that determines whether they win the fight with the Brotherhood itself involves outside individuals coming in to help. Now, I have no inherent problem with these others coming to help. My problem stems from the fact that we don't see how they got here. Did they all have secondary communicators or trackers with them? It seems like they might have, based on the red light that flashes on Beast Boy's costume as he goes to the secret base. If that is the case though, this takes away from Beast Boy's own part in this arc, as he doesn't really do anything to bring them together, even if he does come up with a bit of a plan for how he can get into the base with this specific group. In other words, this isn't about Beast Boy bringing the group together, at least as far as we can tell. They're brought together by a previously established tool, and the other members of the Titans just somehow get inside. It's all quite arbitrary and undefined, and rather than making Beast Boy seem impressive, it makes the Brotherhood seem incompetent. After they get into the base, this episode is basically a big fight scene where the heroes end up winning. While it is kind of neat to see them all fighting like this, I would have much preferred something on a smaller scale that felt more personal, like Beast Boy having a lengthier conversation with just the main members of the Brotherhood. As it stands, I just don't find this fight scene nearly as cathartic as it could have been, and it could have been really cathartic. After all, the Brotherhood has caused so many problems in Beast Boy's life. In many ways, they're central to the way he often acts, to the ways that he searches for acceptance. This is Beast Boy's time to shine, but instead the spotlight is cast out on a wide cast of characters, some which we know well, some that we hardly know at all, and one that I thought was dead? I mean, how'd Red Star get back here? I do understand that themes about friendship are also central here, but I feel that by extending outwards so much, by including so many people, this season features a broad conflict that ultimately lacks focus. There may be a lot in the picture, but the whole thing is a bit blurry. I respect that the creators went for something so ambitious here, but the result is unfortunately disappointing to me. So with that, let's move on to the final episode in this series, Things Change. An episode that is emotionally and symbolically rich, but which is, from the perspective of discussing plot, a disappointing end to the series. First, this episode brings in a lot of new questions and leaves some other questions I already had going into it unanswered. Chief among these is, how did Terra come back? Or perhaps, is this even Terra at all? There's no definitive answer to this question in the episode itself, though regardless of whether this is or is not Terra, this character's role within this episode is clear. She is meant to embody the idea that things change, that we must at some point move on from the past, from that which we are used to or that which we expect, and go on to different things. This is a theme that's generally easy to relate to. I mean, we all need to move on from some things in our lives at some point. Sometimes the world is not what we expect it to be or what we thought it was. This is an aspect of the episode that is similarly explored through the fact that, when the Titans have gotten back to their city, a lot of what they enjoyed about it is gone. It's also explored through the strange villain of this episode who can change what matter it's made up of. In other words, it's in a constant state of change. Basically, almost everything in this episode is involved in that idea that things will change. There's no running away from that. On a meta level, this is a commentary on the viewer's experience with the show itself. There is no choice. They need to move on, just as Beast Boy needs to move on from Terra. It's a crushing character moment that matches a similarly crushing moment for the audience. It's over. This chapter of the story is closed. But there are other possibilities that exist beyond that. Just as Beast Boy runs through this door and into the white light, so will the audience find new possibilities and new things to enjoy. It's representative of all the possible paths that lie before him and us. It's representative of the journeys that life may bring. It's powerful stuff. However, despite how much I respect this representation of the central theme of this episode, and despite how emotionally resonant it is, I found myself ultimately disappointed that this is the end of the series. Of course, if there is a season 6, this will change, but for now, I'm going to assume that this is the end. My main problem is that Slade is just gone. A decent amount of time in the last season was dedicated to an interesting plot where he comes back to life. So where is he now? If that was the action, where's the consequence? Also, what's up with this robotic Slade who Beast Boy fights? Where did that come from? Is Slade messing with them again? And who is this new villain beyond its symbolic space within the show? Sure, if something works on a symbolic level, that's cool, but it would be nice if it had a meaning on a literal level, too. Overall, based on all my complaints thus far, I don't consider this season to be a satisfying conclusion to Teen Titans. It's been messy, rushed, bloated, and thematically unfocused, despite some interesting ideas and a lot of potential. I really hope that Season 6 arrives, as another season would do a lot to fill in the gaps that this season has left, and could make returning to this one more satisfying as well. Still, I probably should take a moment to reflect on things change some more. After all, it's oddly pertinent to the central question of this video series. Is Teen Titans 2003 as great as we remember? Well, it's definitely changed, so the last episode of this series is right about that. Or, well, it hasn't really changed. Really, I'm the one who's changed. My perception has changed. I never would have thought, though, back then that I would end up making an 8-part series about it, that I would hyper-focus on background details and discuss thematic consistency or stuff like that. And perception is a big deal. The context wherein we experience a show can really change everything about our understanding of it. But I'm getting off track. The question is simple. Is it as great as we remember? First off, I can't answer that question for you. The we aspect of that statement is meant to be about us all discussing this together, about your individual comments being equal in importance to my opinions that I've expressed in video form. But I can answer this question. Is it as great as I remember? As much as I'm tempted to toe the line and give a response that ultimately can't offend anyone, I'm going to give an honest answer. If you've watched this whole series, I owe you that much, I think. So, honestly, no, I don't think it is. Back then, when I was younger, it was so different from the other cartoons I was used to, from SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents and even Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was, as far as I can remember, my first real experience with superheroes, with this type of character that has had a massive cultural impact. That's special. That will always be special. But it's no longer that unique thing it once was. Now, it's a solid show that I enjoyed thoroughly, but that I also have significant problems with that I never would have considered when I was younger. It will always hold that fond, nostalgic place in my heart, but I can never go back to that. Things have changed, for better and for worse. So no, it's not as great as I remember. But it is more interesting, and it is more rewarding in some ways. I never would have thought so much about Season 2's take on Terra back then, for example. And I never would have thought about Raven's plot in Season 4 the same way I did now. Hell, I didn't even see the whole plot back then, at least not as far as I recall. In some ways, this means that it reached higher heights for me now than it ever did before, despite the lows that I also never thought of as lows as a kid. So I guess it's a more inconsistent experience now too, but that isn't always a bad thing. Regardless though, whether it was better or worse or as great was never really the point. The point was to talk about this show that meant a lot to me and that still means a lot to me, to go through it with all of you and to have a good time doing it. So let me know whether you think it's as great as you remember in the comments. Let me know about your favorite seasons and favorite moments. And let's all hope that Season 6 manages to get created. Thank you so much for going through this whole thing with me. It's been a great time. So you might be wondering what the next series is then. Well, I held a vote over on Patreon and the majority agreed. The next series is going to be Avatar: The Last Airbender, and boy oh boy, am I excited to talk about that one. Also, if you want any more videos on Teen Titans, I've linked to a couple in the description below that you might enjoy. Lastly, thank you to all of you on Patreon who were able to support me in the creation of these videos and in the creation of future videos. It's amazing that this is going to be able to be my part-time job during university this year. Just, it's not something I would have expected to happen like this. I didn't expect this sort of jump. But I just feel so fortunate and happy and thankful about this YouTube thing, and it's all because you enjoy the videos and because you support me. So I can't say it enough. Thank you. You're the best. And I hope you have an awesome day. Bye-bye for now, and see you again soon.